Hey folks, today we're doing another round of my nonfiction book tour, looking at my nonfiction collection overall and giving you a little bit more information about stuff. This time around we're going to be getting into nonfiction books that actually I think I've read maybe half of them, so the other half I haven't read yet, so what I know about it is a little bit less. Just figured I would share anyway, and because we're still technically in spooky season, I figured what we would talk about today is all of my true crime related books. Firstly, what am I interested about in true crime? Well, if you've been watching my videos for a little bit, you might have seen a couple of these come up in like monthly wrap-ups or book hauls. You might have seen or heard me rather talk about different seasonal vibes and podcasts that I'm interested in. I have a particular interest in true crime. I think it's partially adjacent to my interest in mysteries overall, and I think some of it also has to do with my own morbid fascination with varying things. I don't really tend to like unsolved crimes that much because those bother me a lot. I kind of like things solved, if that makes any sense. It's a little bit better on my overall anxiety, I guess. But there's a lot of things involving like crime that interest me. While some of these books have to do with like murder and stuff like that, I'm also very interested in like heists and varying things like that. So yeah, I think firstly I could mention the book that I recently just barely wrapped up, which was Feather Thief. I don't know where I put my copy. I meant to put it away. I don't know where it's ended up. But it is a book about a heist that was done at the Tring Museum, which is a natural history museum in England. A bunch of bird skins and feathers and things were stolen from the museum by a amateur fly tyer, like Victorian fly tyer. If you want to hear more about it, you can hear my rant about that book, or rather my review of it that I just posted last week, which was my my September wrap up, and I talked a little bit more about it, and I talked a little bit more about that case. That is not one of those cases that gets wrapped up in a neat little bow. Well, it does, but it doesn't. It's definitely a frustrating case. I first heard about it on a podcast called True Crime Campfire, which I also recommend is a really good podcast. I'm a little bit behind in their episodes right now, but they are really interesting. Like, they do a really good job telling the stories of cases, and I also kind of like the fact that they have tons of snark when it comes to the bad guys. I appreciate a lot of snark when it comes to the villain of the story. Anyway, that's the first of my books that I guess are classified along the lines of true crime. I have one more book that kind of involves not really heist, but like forgery, dishonesty, and stuff like that, and it's The Man Who Made Vermeers, and it's Unvarnishing the Legend of Master Forger Han van Meegeren, and it's by Jonathan Lopez. This is one of these books I have that I have not read yet. I got because I found it at the secondhand shop and was very fascinated by it, because this is a story that I feel like I've heard the story in passing, just barely, like a blip, but I don't really know like the background and the whole thing. But it's about this like Dutch painter who was made famous at the end of World War II. He ended up forging a bunch of paintings by Vermeers, sold one of these to a high-ranking Nazi, I believe, Hermann Göring, in mockery of the Nazis. A story that has been believed ever since. Too bad it just isn't true. This is about the man. He's neither an unappreciated artist nor anti-fascist hero. Van Meegeren emerges as an ingenious, dyed-in-the-wool crook talented Mr. Ripley armed with a paintbrush. So he like forged a whole bunch of Vermeer's paintings, and but the thing is that he didn't just sell to the Nazis and stuff. He also sold to like other famous collectors and things, a bunch of forged paintings. So it's a real look at this guy and what he was like, what he was up to, what he did, and it's not just he's upheld as like this kind of hero, but he was just, I mean, yeah, it is kind of funny that he sold forged works to the Nazis because, haha, assholes. But at the same time, he was just being deceitful all over the place, which is fascinating to me. I'm really interested in that kind of thing, like art forgery and stuff like that. One of my favorite old movies is starring Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, and it is How to Steal a Million, and it deals with art forgery because Audrey Hepburn's character is the daughter of an art forger, and it's just, yeah, it's fantastic. If you've never watched it before, you should. It's hilarious and it's just great, and Audrey Hepburn is a delight. But yeah, so I'm interested in like art forgery and art history and things like that around this time period too. I'm very interested in art around World War II because there's another story, I think there's a couple of books written about it too. I know there's a film about it. It's a specific legion of soldiers, I believe, who are sent to steal back the cache of art and artifacts that the Nazis stole from people, especially like the Jewish people that they like rounded up and everything. So that's also a really fascinating story about art thievery and stuff during like World War II and whatever. So yeah, I'm interested in all of that kind of thing. So that's why this particular story is really fascinating, and also because that's what I had heard, that little brief thing that I had heard about Van Meegeren. Even if I didn't remember his name, I knew there was an art forger who sold forged artwork to the Nazis to stick it to them, but there's apparently just a lot more to that story. Yeah, I have not read this one yet, but this is high up on my list of nonfiction that I want to try to get to next year. So let's go into this one first, because this also has to do with deceit. Really, really cool deceit. This was a book that I read a couple of years ago. Loved it. Loved the movie too. It is Black Klansman, and it is by Ron Stallworth. Now, Ron Stallworth was the first, was which department? The Colorado Springs Police Department. The first black detective at the Colorado Springs Police Department. And in the 70s, I believe, he came across this like classified ad put in the paper by the KKK, and he decided he was going to answer it. And he manages to deceive the Klan for quite a while. Basically talks with them over the phone and through writing for a while, and manages to infiltrate with the help of another detective who was white and who was like the physical stand-in for him, and manages to like get an undercover investigation into the Klan and to kind of fight hate and figure out what their whole recruiting was, what their plan was, if there was anything dangerous going to be occurring. It's really fascinating, and he also did a lot of work, like this one says, during the months-long investigation, he sabotaged cross burnings, exposed white supremacists in the military, and fooled David Duke himself. It is not that long of a book. It's a quick read, easy read, super fascinating, super action-packed. Even the bits that are like a lot of like desk work and stuff like that are fascinating because Ron Stallworth himself is so funny, and he's just, yeah, it's just such a wonderful read. I really loved this book. The movie does take some liberties here and there, but the movie is also excellent. Like, it was just so well done. So if you're interested in like undercover investigations, you want to read more about like someone infiltrating a hate group, or someone sticking it to a hate group, or you are interested in hearing the story of the first black detective in Colorado Springs, go for it. Like I said, super quick read, super easy read, super fascinating, awesome overall, and also watch the movie. It was very good. There are other covers of this too, if this is upsetting to you. This cover did give me pause, but I know it's a movie tie-in cover, so. Another one that has to do sort of along the lines of it, I've grouped it in with true crime because I knew about this story already, but I really learned more about it on true crime podcasts, and I think it is kind of adjacent because it is investigative, and it is the famous, the wonderful, and brilliant Nellie Bly's 10 Days in a Madhouse. So if you don't know who Nellie Bly is, I don't know where the fuck you've been, because she was absolutely fascinating. She was the first female, I'm pretty sure she was the first female investigative reporter. I could be misspeaking. I know there was another kind of investigative reporter around the same time, but I think she technically came later. Yeah, anyway. Nellie Bly, if you don't know about this, which is what put her on the map and got her noticed, which you might also know her for Around the World in 72 Days. Basically, these were compiled into books, but they were like articles in the newspaper because she wrote for a newspaper. Around the World in 72 Days is when she decided to travel around the world and beat Jules Verne, the record that he wrote, Around the World in 80 Days, where Phileas Fogg and Passepartout went around the world. Yeah, she set out to beat that record, and in fact did, because, 72 Days is the title. So, this is the one that put her on the map, though. She ended up going undercover into an insane asylum. I believe it was, Blackwell's Island. This place, one of the worst places. There were a lot of reports of just human rights violations, just terrible. Or did we really have human rights violations at the time? Now they would be. Just really terrible, awful treatment of the women there, and this is still at a time when women can get locked away for hysteria, and that could be, anything from, well, they're just depressed, or they're anxious, or they're going through a tough time, or maybe it's just because they have an independent streak. They don't take shit. They're just not fitting in what society wants exactly. And they could be committed by their family, by their husbands. They basically had no recourse and they'd just be put there. And the treatment of everyone there, whether or not they needed treatment at all, it was just overall just horrendous, awful conditions. And they've been investigated before a little bit, but things were cleaned up and made to look nicer. So Nellie Bly ends up, with the help of her newspaper, she ends up getting herself committed to Blackwell's Island and investigating, and she was secretly writing notes and articles and things like that on random scraps of paper, I think, tissues, different stuff like that. I have not read this one yet, but yeah, she basically she did an expose basically on the treatment of women at this asylum, and it changed things, or really set in motion the change of things. Very, very important work, very cool undercover work, and made all the more famous by the gumption of Nellie Bly, and that she was just on it and brave enough to handle this. So yeah, like I said, I have not read this one yet, but I've always been interested in Nellie Bly since I was a little kid, because she's just so cool. And then I think we pretty much get into murder and crime and everything like that. You know, I've talked about true crime podcasts and things that I like listening to, and one of the first ones that I started listening to was My Favorite Murder. When the host of it came out with a book, like a joint memoir type thing a few years ago, I was like, okay, obviously I have to read that. So this is Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. This is their joint memoir. These are the ladies themselves. And this is basically their story of how they got into true crime, how it relates back to their own life experiences, how they managed to stay sexy and don't get murdered. And they also have a lot of advice in here for women and people in general, but also younger people who, you know, just trying to encourage being aware, avoiding situations, and how to stay sexy and don't get murdered. Really interesting. It's funny. It's a little bit heart-wrenching in some places. They talk about, yeah, like I said, their experiences with true crime, what got them interested in true crime in the first place, and cases and things that touch them personally. I found this really fascinating because, as I've mentioned in a previous video recently, my interest in true crime is probably comprised of having been exposed to a lot of like Dateline in 2020 and just murder mysteries in general when I was little, but also had to do with the murder of one of my close friends when I was younger. So I have just always been morbidly fascinated, and just really wanting to not only learn more about crime, but learn more about what makes people commit violent acts like this. What pushes someone to the point, and ask yourself the question, is everyone capable of a murder? Is there a pressure point that does that? Are some people never capable of it? Like, I want to understand the psychology of it and stuff like that. Also see how to remain safer. I will say that's probably what got me into true crime. What kept the fascination and the anxiety going probably is more kidnapping cases and things like that. When I was little, John Benet Ramsey was everywhere. The O.J. Simpson case was everywhere. And when I got to be a teenager, Elizabeth Smart got kidnapped out of her own bedroom window, and I personally slept in my parents' room on the floor for at least 2 or 3 weeks. So everybody has like things in the news that I'm sure have affected them, and some people, like my mom for example, just doesn't watch any of that anymore and doesn't like learning about that. And me, I like learning more about it because of my anxiety, and I like to stay informed and try to figure out what makes people do terrible things. So this particular memoir is just really interesting to learn more about the host background if you're interested in like their podcasts and their thoughts anyway. But it's also, it was nice finding passages that I really kind of related to overall. And also I think their advice at times is funny but also useful. So yeah, I would recommend this for anyone who likes the podcast but haven't read the book, or maybe you didn't know about the book. If you're interested in learning more about these particular people, podcasts, or I guess this is in tandem with the last book, is I'll Be Gone in the Dark. And this is One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. Michelle McNamara unfortunately passed away a little bit before this book was finished. This has an afterword by her husband, Patton Oswalt, who you might know better. He's a comedian. He's been in a lot of different shows and stuff. And it has an introduction by Gillian Flynn, who I think is the one who wrote Gone Girl, right? I don't know, I haven't read her books. So she was very involved in trying to get the story more notoriety for the search for the Golden State Killer. He was known as like a couple of different words, like names and stuff like that, but she, I think, is the one who coined the Golden State Killer to keep him under one particular identifiable name and make things a little bit clearer and easier. You might have heard about this case all over the place because this book came out of it. There's been a documentary. There has been tons of coverage. Paul Holes is actually I think the lead investigator on the case, and he has been just transported to ultra stardom if you're interested in that kind of thing. But I'm sure you might know his name even if you aren't into like true crime and stuff like that. This is basically the cases with a big focus on the victims, but also just the search overall for this particular killer and the work, especially how personally invested that Michelle McNamara got into this case and kind of obsessed with it to try to get an answer and get closure for these tons of families that were affected and just busted open by this bullshit that this fucking creep did. And unfortunately she passed away before this was finished, and also before he was caught. So this also has an afterword written about ending chapters involving the killer, the finding of him using DNA. Now we know what his name is. Former cop Joseph D'Angelo, the fucking scumbag. So that's more information about finding him, how they found him, and the arrest and everything. A little bit that followed up until the point of this being published at that point. So I think this was like one of the first cases that was solved using the like 23andMe thing. There's been a few more since that people have been able to locate and find some answers, which is wonderful. I know a lot of people are bothered by it. I'm not. I want things to be solved. I want there to be closure for people. Yeah, so take my DNA. If you unearth some skeletons in the closet, that's okay. They should go to jail. If you're interested in this case, there's upsetting details in here, there's photographs and stuff, but there's no like upsetting photos. This is photos of the suspects, photos of some of the victims, of Michelle herself working on her investigation and everything. Pictures of the investigators who tried their best, so and worked really hard to figure this out. So yeah, if you are interested in true crime or you want to know more about this case other than what you might have been hearing about in like the news and stuff like that over the past few years, this is really fascinating. And like I said, I'm not someone who I don't really watch them because they're upsetting, like documentaries and stuff like that. I don't watch those anymore because they're really upsetting. The book has some details, but I would say it's a little more tame than watching, say, the Ted Bundy files or something like that. Which actually brings me to Ted Bundy. I have Anne Rule's major book, The Stranger Beside Me. Shocking true story of serial killer Ted Bundy, the all-American boy who murdered women. This is Anne Rule's most famous book, I think, and as it well should be, because she actually knew Ted Bundy. She actually considered him to be a friend. She worked with him at the suicide hotline. Yeah, he was on the suicide hotline, if you can believe that. That's a fact you didn't know. And he was supposedly very handsome and charismatic. I don't see it. He's got them dead shark eyes, but the 1970s and 80s were a different time and place. covers not only the terrible murders, but also talks about what is known about Ted Bundy, and also has very personal notes because Anne Rule, like I said, considered him to be a friend, and talks a lot about her interactions with him and how at first she knew the bits and pieces about who this could possibly be, but at the same, and it pointed to him, but at the same time she couldn't quite believe it because this is her really kind friend, and that was a lot. So this was very interesting to read. I think this is most likely probably the best book you're going to find about the Ted Bundy cases, the murders he committed, probably because, you know, she did know him, so it's probably, I think, the most interesting one that you would read to come to it from that perspective, as well as being a crime writer who was also kind of invested in figuring out what was going on, who was murdering all these women. I will say that at the time she was writing this, I almost wonder if she was maybe a little bit too close to it, just how some things are phrased in different portions of this book. I feel like maybe she was just a little bit too close to it at the time because, like I said, he was a friend. But still, I don't think you're gonna find a better book written about this particular serial killer. So, I do have another one of her books, but I haven't read it yet, so I'll talk about that in a minute. The other book I have read is The Devil in the White City, Murder, Madness, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. This is by Erik Larson. Erik Larson is a true crime writer that tends to kind of group things in the time period together, which this particular book, fascinating. I will say there's a lot of information in here. At some points it does kind of drag. This is a kind of thick boy, but still ultimately incredibly fascinating. So this deals with the serial killer H.H. Holmes, who built his murder palace in Chicago at the time of the Chicago World's Fair. The Chicago World's Fair, on a personal note, is something that if I had a time machine, I'd go back in time to see what it actually was like. There's a lot of buildings that are still in place from the World Fair. They were built as like exhibitions and stuff, and they're still standing, but a lot of things are not. But this goes deep in depth about the World's Fair and all the crazy circumstances that led to it, that occurred while they were trying to make it, like, this area of Chicago where it was just not great. It was like super messy and a lot of things were going on, but yeah, this deals with like the whole trouble of trying to put on the World's Fair and like what the World's Fair itself was like. And then it also deals with H.H. Holmes, who showed up in this area and specifically built his, it was called his, I think it's actually called the Murder Castle, is the term that is chosen for it, but it's like this big boarding house, basically, thing that he built that had like secret rooms and varying things within where he could easily try to kill people. And yeah, it got burnt down, or if not burnt down, it got knocked down, so you know, it doesn't exist anymore. But very fascinating stuff about him. I will say this does have some very upsetting details in it, involving children specifically, so that's a warning about that. But super fascinating. If you are also a history junkie like me, you might find this particular work interesting. I do want to read some more of Erik Larson's works. I know there's one in particular that is like about the sinking of the Lusitania. I haven't gone for that one yet because I've heard things about that and it is incredibly upsetting, so haven't dove into that yet. But Yeah, if you're like interested in like historical things, you want to learn more about the Chicago World's Fair and how interesting it was, or you want to learn more about H.H. Holmes, pretty good for that. You can tell Eric Larson really did tons and tons and tons and tons of research. I think I'll talk about the unread ones dealing with specific cases, first of which is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is, I think, probably one of the most famous true crime books. I think wasn't there a movie or something made of this? Can't remember. That's Truman Capote. So this is dealing with the Clutter family murders. If you don't know anything about it, in 1959, in Holcomb, Kansas, 4 members of the Clutter family were savagely murdered by blast from a shotgun held a few inches from their faces. No apparent motive for the crime, almost no clues. Truman Capote reconstructs the murder investigation that led to the capture, trial, and execution of the killers. Yeah, this is like his book about that. He really got to know the murderers, and got to know more about the Clutter family. I have heard mixed things about this book. Well, I have heard that he generates a lot of like feeling and sympathy throughout. I have heard differing things about his methods of writing, and I have heard that maybe he got a little bit too personally involved in this case. Some things that he claimed were patently untrue by people who knew the victims more, and just is kind of a controversial piece at this point, but I still do want to pick it up and read it because I haven't actually read anything of Truman Capote's before. I haven't read Breakfast at Tiffany's either. I've watched the movie, enjoy it for the most part. I mean, it's got my girl Audrey in it, so I haven't actually read one of his works before, so I did want to read it, and I did want to know because, again, this is I think probably next to The Stranger Beside Me, this is probably one of the most well-known true crime books out there. But yeah, if you ever wanted to know more about the Clutter family murders, or you're interested in Truman Capote, this is probably a good book for that. Whenever I get around to reading it, I might see if there's anything else about this particular case, if it feels like maybe it's a little bit too biased one way or the other. I also I'm borrowing this from a friend. I don't know when I'm gonna get to this because this is a chunky boy too, and I don't tend to like reading about cults that much, mostly. But this is Helter Skelter, the true story of the Manson murders, and this is by Vincent Bugliosi with Kurt Gentry. A lot of fascinating, somewhere, where are they? There they are. Fascinating photos and things of the case. I don't think there's anything upsetting in here either. I could be wrong though. But yeah, so this is about the murders committed by the Manson family. I think the ones that everybody probably knows is the murder of Sharon Tate, who, unless I'm getting actresses confused, I'm pretty sure she was a star of Rosemary's Baby. I think that was probably the most famous, like, murder committed by the Manson family. So this is basically more about that cult, more about these murders in general. And Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote this, was the prosecuting attorney in the Manson trial. And this is his account of how he built the case from what a defense attorney dismissed as only 2 fingerprints in Vince Bugliosi. So this is like just awesome detective work in it, and apparently it's just really, really good. I have been on the fence about wanting to read this for a while. Like, on the one hand, I've been wanting to read it because famous true crime book, want to know more in-depth things other than random stuff that I've heard. But on the other hand, I find cults to be extremely agitating and upsetting. Like, I really hate that kind of thing, and I really hate that a lot of the time you can't do anything about cults. They just exist and you can't do shit about them because they're legally allowed to exist, and that just gets me so bad. So I tend to avoid a lot of stuff about cults because it agitates me to know, and but This one I think will agitate me slightly less, even though people still love him and I think they're fucking delusional, but like, I mean, he's dead as far as I know. Pretty sure he's dead, right? He got caught a long time ago. Look at them crazy eyes. Psychopath. This is more about that. So I don't know when I'm gonna get to this. Like I said, I borrowed it from my friend, but she didn't seem like she's in a rush to get it back necessarily. So I will get around to reading this. I do not think it is going to be read this year. I think this is probably more an early next year thing. But this is a chunky boy, so might be in it for a while. But yeah, I think if you are also, I don't know how it's written, so I can't like recommend it, but I do know that this is famous for a reason. And people like are really fascinated by this. So the one I haven't read is another Anne Rule, and it is Small Sacrifices, and this is about the Diane Downs case. So Diane Downs was mother of 3 who ended up shooting her 3 children because the guy that she loved was obsessed with, more like didn't want to be a dad. There were other reasons he didn't want to be with her, but that was part of it. And she, like a complete twat that she was, went and shot her 3 kids. Unfortunately, one of them passed away. And this has more to do with her and her children and this entire case. And I think it basically covers everything, like her entire background, and then also like the case that everyone was building against her, and then like everything. So I have listened to multiple true crime episodes about this, and this kind of particular thing is something that I don't always listen to because it's personally upsetting, but I'm going to a place where I can handle information about that, and I do want to read more of Anne Rule's writing, so I figured that a good place to start would be with this famous case that I already know a bunch about. There are photos in here too, but they're not, I mean, a couple of them are kind of upsetting, but they're not like crime scene photos. And then I've got a couple of books about the poison and forensics. Actually, I have another book around here somewhere. I don't know where I put it. It is the Forensic Case Book, and I cannot exactly remember who it's by, but I'll put up like a picture of it. And it is basically more of a guide to forensics and how they are done, basically. I think this might actually be technically a textbook for people getting into that field, but I also found it online and was fascinated about it because A, I find it interesting, and B, I needed it for my own research purposes for a book that I'm writing, and actually will probably aid me in another book that I'm on the second draft of. Information that is necessary to know. So that one is super fascinating. I didn't get that far into it when I started doing research, so I'm not super duper far, I'm not that far into the book, but from what I had read of it, it is very fascinating. It has things broken down very neatly and succinctly, and I've mentioned before, I'm not a big sciencey person. I don't really do well with a lot of that. I failed chem, so not my strong suit. Have been finding that book to be really easy to understand. It talks about things breaks down things very easily as a step-by-step process of doing things, and it's just very interesting so far, and I think that's going to be a great tool. So if that's also something that you're interested in out of just pure human curiosity, or if you're like me and you're doing research for some purpose, like a novel or something, probably a good place to start because, like I said, very handy. Along those lines, I have a couple other books that I got for research purposes. One of these is The Poisoner's Handbook. This is Murder and the Birth of Forensic Medicine in Jazz Age New York, and this is by Deborah Bloom, and this talks about the great and wonderful, non-corrupted Chief Medical Examiner of New York City. His name was Charles Norris, and the brilliant, wonderful toxicologist Alexander Gettler. And this is basically these two becoming like a super dream team, being like the forensic people during the Jazz Age in New York. A lot of this has to do with Prohibition, and unfortunately a lot of murders and accidental deaths and things that occurred during Prohibition because the government decided that they needed to do a war on the American people about whether or not they could fucking drink alcohol, and did truly terrible things like finding out the base of what people were using for alcohol consumption and fucking poisoning it, leading to more death. Just crazy stuff overall. But the backdrop of that, while these two are trying to, you know, fight with reason about, hey, maybe prohibition shouldn't be a fucking thing, it also deals with a lot of poison cases that occurred, whether it be kind of accidental-ish related to prohibition, or whether it be actual purposeful murder committed. And this is such a fascinating book, like I said. Sciencey bits, but totally broken down. Really easy for you if you're like me and science is not your strong suit. For fascinating cases, I am obsessed with Charles Norris and Alexander Gettler to the point of, I know that Charles Norris, at least, maybe Gettler as well, but I know that Norris wrote different articles and things on different cases and poisonings and stuff like that, and I want to locate them and read them, not only for research purposes, but also because I'm fascinated by him, by the both of them actually. And I really like how this one's broken down, because it's broken down into each poison and discusses a specific case or varying types of cases. So like chloroform, wood alcohol, cyanides, arsenic, mercury, radium, ethyl alcohol. It does have a little bit about the radium girls it discusses as well in here. Just super fascinating stuff, super easy read, keeps you on the edge of your seat. I will say that there are some details in this one, whether of the crime scenes themselves, the forensic work that was being done, or in a couple of cases executions of murders. There are some details in here that are kind of upsetting, so keep that in mind if you're interested in this book. But yeah, again, if you like history, if you're interested in forensic science, if you want to just, maybe this would be a good place to ease into that kind of thing, because it's not dealing with a specific case, it's about varying types of everything. But yeah. And then my last real true crime adjacent book, or true crime book, is one that I've started reading. I'm not finished with it yet. But it is A for Arsenic, The Poisons of Agatha Christie, and this is by Catherine Harkup. And this is a book that, yeah, focuses more on the sciencey thing. So this one, besides the fact that I'm doing it for research, as you can see, I've got like some annotation in here. It also has a little bit more to do with like chemistry and stuff like that, which, like I said, not my strong suit. So this one taking me a little bit longer to get through it, but it is also really fascinating. And if you didn't know, Agatha Christie during World War I and again during World War II spent her wartime volunteer work in dispensaries, and she just naturally kind of learned more about chemicals and poisons especially, and the varying effects that they have on others. She learned a lot more about all of that from her work, and that led to inform a lot of her mystery novels. This is basically talking more about those. So you have, as you can see, it talks about specific books at that time too. So A is for arsenic, is murder is easy, B is for belladonna, the labors of Hercules, C is for cyanide, sparkling cyanide, D is for digitalis, appointment with death, E is for ursurine, crooked house, H is for hemlock, 5 little pigs, M is for monkshood, 450 from Paddington, N is for nicotine, the 3-act tragedy, O is for opium, sad cypress, P is for phosphorus, dumb witness, R is for ricine, partners in crime, S is for strychnine, the mysterious affair of Styles, T is for thallium, the pale horse, and V is for veronal, Lord Edward dies. I've actually read most of these books, so they wouldn't be particular spoilers for me, but if you're someone who doesn't want to get spoiled at all, you might want to read those books before diving into this. But yeah, this talks more about those chemicals, her inspiration behind them, and talks about the use of them in her novels, and I believe also talks about varying cases and stuff like that. So very fascinating. So is true crime related, but also kind of forensic related, but also related to Agatha Christie. So interesting overall. So I'd say if you liked a book like this and are interested in learning more about poisons and stuff, this is probably a good one. If you're just interested in Agatha Christie in general, also a good one. So yeah, these are, like I said, all of my true crime or true crime adjacent books, things that I am particularly interested in. There's a lot more that I'm also interested in, but like I said, I'm very picky about visual things. Honestly, my imagination is enough when things are described to me, so I don't need visual aids for them, and I don't particularly like them when it comes to true crime stuff. So I'm a little bit pickier about what I read and what things that I kind of focus on with my reading. As you can see, most of it is just a fascination or interest in particular cases or heists or varying like forgery, stuff like that. But some of it also is more focused because of research that I've been doing for writing projects. So yeah. Anyway, these are, like I said, my true crime or true crime adjacent books. Let me know if you've read any of them, if there's any of the unread ones that you think I should get to rather sooner rather than later, or if there's any that you would recommend that I haven't like talked about in this video. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new here and would like to subscribe, please do so. And let's see, so I've done paranormal books and I've done true crime. So I've got a couple more categories of nonfiction books left. I don't know which one we're gonna go with next time, but you're probably gonna have at least 2 more, maybe 3 more nonfiction tour videos to look forward to, depending on how I break things up. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.